Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 87, with a quick title change because Tom got something wrong. Well, something right because it is about Mycroft. It is about Home Assistant. But Mycroft, is it going away, Jay? Is that the way we would describe this?
Yeah, it's a developing story, but it's something that I wanted to talk about after the ad read because we talked about Mycroft before. We had a whole episode dedicated to it, and we had the whole episode title, if I remember correctly, of "Hello Mycroft." And we thought
Yep.
about titling this "Goodbye Mycroft," but that wouldn't be enough of a topic to carry the show. We have a lot more to talk about, but we'll cover it.
Yeah, we'll be covering that. But that's episode 24 is the one that this happened in, and now it's going away here. We've now outlasted Mycroft as a
Yeah.
podcast. And what helps us outlast that is paying the bills, which is going to be a big thank you to Linode. They've been a sponsor for a long time. They were sponsored before the Mycroft and after Mycroft. So we
Yep.
thank them for being a sponsor. Great place to run a lot of the projects we talk about in here. If you need a public infrastructure to put some of these things on, we've talked about a lot of projects that'd be great in there. And the project today, interesting, and I bet Jay doesn't have this integration, but we'll find out later. You can integrate Linode is one of the connected apps that you can add to your Home Assistant. It will actually check the
Hmm.
status of your load. I learned that today when I was doing some of the extra notes and research. So we'll be talking about a little bit more on that topic later. But thank you, Linode, for sponsoring. We have an offer code down in the links below. Go to linode.com/homelab show if you'd like to get started with them. We thank them for being a sponsor. And yeah, let's just jump into this. And the first thing
Yep.
we are going to talk about is the going away part of first, what is Mycroft? And I'll let
Yeah.
Jay sum that up.
So Mycroft is, and this is why this is so sad to me because it's one of my favorite open source projects ever. And of course, there's others on that list too because I'm a fanboy when it comes to open source software. I just love it when people create something amazing. But Mycroft was the potential that it had was to maybe possibly challenge the big players when it comes to smart speakers, Alexa and all those others that they have out there. But this one is open source, so you can hack it. You didn't even have to buy one. You could just download the software. You could run it on your computer. You could have a voice assistant anywhere on your, Raspberry Pi, x86 PC, anything that runs Linux basically. The voice engine was open source, so you could download just that part if you want. So it was a very professional experience because it was one of those that I think anybody could set up. It acts just like the proprietary ones where Mycroft would spin up a web server or something to show you that, or actually an access point. You connect to it, and then it asks you to give it your actual Wi-Fi SSID and password. Then it joins the network, and it does that all just like a device that you bought from Best Buy would do. And it offers the same features. You could ask it questions, it could search for you, you could integrate it with your Home Assistant or whatever you want. And since it's open source, you could create your own skills, as it's called, so you can extend it further. At one point, I had it connected to my Volumio, so I could say, "Hey, name of assistant, play, name of band or whatever," and it would actually do it. It was pretty cool. So, the Mark One is the device that's been in the background of, I wanna say, the majority of my videos at this point are getting close. It's on the top of my desktop. If you're
Yeah.
watching the video version, you could probably see it.
If you
And
watch
people
these
ask me, "What
videos,
is
it's
that
right behind
thing?"
him.
Yeah, it's right there. That's the Mark One, the very first one. I think I bought that in 2019, 2018. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. And then that was going well. Then they were coming out with the Mark II, which is an upgraded device, would have, faster processor and some other features added, different design. And, okay, that's cool, it's moving along. So, basically, I was gonna get a review unit, but for the channel, but that never came. But it's fine because I figured they were, really busy, they have an open source project they're maintaining, no problem. I'll just buy the Mark II myself out of my own money, and then I'll review that because either way, I wanted to have a review of the Mark II. I mean, I bought it, I may as well, put out a video if I spend money on something. But then I just randomly checked their blog, and they're shutting down, and I'm thinking, "Well, I can't review it because why? You can't buy it. Well, you might be able to buy one if they have one in stock, but I don't know why anyone would if it's shutting down." So that's sad. I could figure out something else to use the Mark II for, but it's still developing because I feel like so far they're saying the right things. They're coming out with an alternative operating system that should be supported. I don't really know the full story on that. It's Neon OS, which is weird because we have KDE Neon as a
Oh,
distribution, and
that's
I kind of thought
confusing.
that's what they were doing, like KDE Neon for Mycroft. Why? No, it's
Name
just
collision.
called yeah, it's like name collision, right? So Neon OS, and they're they sent a coupon code to anyone who bought one of these devices for a free flash drive with that preloaded on there. And basically, you put in the coupon code, and it's a $0 order, which is really nice of them to do that. But at the same time, I really hope this gets forked because I feel like there's so much promise here, and they've pushed this so far that someone could conceivably take the software and continue it along. I don't know what's required to make that happen, but I don't want to see this go away. So one of the reasons why I wanted to mention this, one, because I'm not going to do a review. So anyone who's doing or who's been following my channel and is wondering where the Mark II review is, well, it's just not going to happen because of that reason. But also, I wanted to mention this just in case anyone listening is, an open source developer, maybe wants to become one, has a team or some people that want to work on something that might like this kind of thing. Just to throw this out there, see if anyone wants to, and I'm not saying this on behalf of Mycroft, right? I don't even know if they want me to say this. I don't care. I mean, this is just a project and a personal thing. If there's any way we could keep this idea going, I think that would be really amazing. And I think voice assistants that are open source could be a major boon to Home Assistant. I mean, just imagine being able to voice control everything without having to sell your soul to Amazon or Google.
Yeah, and I just I realized I want to make sure I add this as show notes, specifically the link to that blog post that Jay's referring to,
Yep.
just so you guys can read it in its entirety, so you can understand what our thoughts are on it, and of course read it all for yourself as well. So
Yep. And one of the things that's really cool about the voice engine that they released is you can have it actually process everything offline. I mean, sure, it's gonna by default, or maybe not by default, but depending on how you set it up, it can go out to the internet and obviously get some things, but you could totally just cut that off and make it only answer on the LAN and not even go outside your internet or your local area anyway. So there's a lot of promise here. I just really hope that happens. But as far as like why did this happen? Why are they going under? Um, there's nothing clear yet. There's no real answer. I mean, there's some things in the blog post, but nothing incredibly clear. It's really strange how this works out when you have a project that does everything right, but they still don't make it. Another one is the JingPad, the Linux tablet I reviewed, which was Apple quality. I couldn't believe it. This was an amazing tablet, super durable build quality. Did you see that while you were here, Tom? I
yeah,
don't
I
remember.
did. I was actually impressed with the build quality on that.
Yeah, and the developers disappeared. Did this
Yeah.
ghosted everything, just gone. Like what? They had like the best Linux tablet ever made, and then they just disappear. And wow, weird. So there's just this weirdness about open source projects that develop a hardware product that generates profit. That it's really hard for these people to do it, obviously, because they're not the big box retailers. But at the same time, if people can't step up and challenge those companies, then well, we're always going to be at their mercy. So I hope something good comes out of this.
Yeah, it's interesting, but being an open source, being a self-hosted project, there's a good likelihood there'll be someone to pick it up and fork it. Now, the likelihood of being one of the big guys like Google is pretty much zero because they're like,
Yeah,
hey, welcome to our ecosystem. I'm
right.
also for all the Home Assistant stuff we'll be talking about next. I've never been big on the voice integration for it because I honestly, one of my favorites is the fact that I have it on my phone and I'm able
Right.
to be able to just to switch things on and off via phone, via web interface. Phone is probably the most because it's just conveniently in there. But of course, and something that's just out of view over at Jay's is a screen. And this is becoming a popular option where you have a control panel where you can set automations or build automations off other things. Matter of fact, the whole concept of automation I'll dive into where I've built things like how it watches my Synology and my Synology triggers on things that then tells Home Assistant to do a thing, presence sensors and things like that. So,
Right.
yeah, we'll talk a little bit more of that next.
Yep. So yeah, that's the story about Mycroft, and I totally agree. I mean, the likelihood of countering one of the big companies like that is very much nothing. But would it just be so cool if someone did? I just
Yeah.
will hope to see that like one of the underdogs just rises up and just becomes a more popular option. I guess we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Now on to Home Assistant itself, because
Yep.
Mycroft was just an extra integration for Home Assistant. You don't need it. Well,
Right.
it's a want, not a need. So it's not a
Correct.
requirement. It's not a prerequisite. So this does not affect the Home Assistant project, which by the way is doing really well. I've actually been impressed. Their updates come rather frequently. The updates, with the exception of one in my few years of using it, I've had a single update that broke one minor integration, which was my Synology integration. Didn't work for, I think it was almost 16 hours before they fixed it. Like that's how fast
Wow.
they fix problems. That's better than most companies. They knew it broke when it update. Options were roll back. Options were wait until the developers who were aware of it. And by the way, it broke on a Friday, but they managed to get it fixed. I think it was Sunday. By Sunday, like broke on Friday, updated on Saturday, and on Sunday there was a fix for it. It was still happened relatively quick, but the overall, I would really rate Home Assistant as a very high quality, well developed, very active community project. So
I
we can
wonder
make
if
it right
their
there.
developers use it a lot, and when there's a bug, it affects them too. So it's like they have to get it going because their significant other is probably, upset that the lights don't work. Fix the thing. Okay, fine. And then they fix it, then send the pull request. Obviously, I have no idea that that's even true, but it would just be kind of
Yeah,
funny because I'm sure they use it because if unless they
very
just develop
likely.
for the sake of developing, probably not.
Yeah. But Home Assistant, kind of in a nutshell, is a self-hosted, does not need the cloud by default. You can connect it to cloud apps. It does have lots of extensibility, but in a nutshell, you're talking about a system that you can host yourself. Now you can host this on different things. That includes a Raspberry Pi, which before you throw a bunch of hate in the comments, it does not require Raspberry Pi. That's just what I'm hosting mine on. Are you hosting yours on a Raspberry Pi, Jay?
I have the Home Assistant Blue, which is the
Oh, okay.
dedicated device that they put out that's based on Odroid.
Got it. So yes, you can use Odroid. You can use other single board computers for it. I don't have the entire list, but they do on their website. But you can also
Yep.
run this as a Docker container. You can run this. I believe there's even. I haven't really done much testing with it, but I will soon. TrueNAS Scale even added this as part of their officially supported packages in. As the app. So there's actually a lot of different places you can run Home Assistant. It's not limited to. We have chose to put it on a Raspberry Pi, but I know we made those choices because I've been using it for a while when Raspberry Pis were plentiful, and now they're not. So
Right.
we we
Yep.
will completely admit to being aware of that. One advantage though of running on small single board computers, just as in general, is if you're doing things like, for example, the studio computer that is bringing you this podcast right now and doing the recording, that was woken up be via my Raspberry Pi sending a Wake on LAN over to it. This is actually a nice feature is you can take this low powered device because this is a question that comes up, and with power concerns being also greater here in 2023, you can have a lot of things just turn off, and then you can build the Wake on LAN. And once again, I'm using my phone, so I have my phone, and I go, I'd like to turn things on like computers, and I have this low powered couple of watt device kicking out some Wake on LAN. That's one of the first easy automations to build into it. If
Yep.
you want to do that, it will go further, and I might do this. I actually, I'm not the biggest Windows person anymore, but my studio computer runs Windows. To get it to shut them down again, you have to load up RPC commands in there and set up users. So I haven't really experimented much with that. I've looked into it, but that actually is a further integration you can do where actually you can make any RPC commands from it. So you're looking at
Mm.
a nice self-contained update. Hell is a really nice update mechanism operating system wherever you decide to load it, and can give you a lot of control. And it's all self-hosted. It's all things that are local on your network. It does not need internet in order to well, it needs an internet to update, but it doesn't need internet to operate. But you could probably figure out a way to limit how it can reach out to the world if you wanted to say it can only reach its update servers. But it's just a really
Yep.
solid platform. And I got to give a warning here. It's a time suck, man. The more
It
you
really
learn how
is.
you can build automation, the more you can't stop building automation and integration. It's like, oh, there went a Saturday. What'd you do? I started reading Home Assistant. I started wondering what everything in the world I could connect to it. And then you find out how big the list is. So then you start connecting it. And even Jay didn't know until before this podcast that you can connect it to have it monitor via API key your Linode instances. And I'm like, really? This is cool.
There's an integration for pfSense and Unify and Unify Protect as well. To go back on what you're saying about Windows, my recording PC is currently running Windows. I haven't had time to switch to Linux yet because it's one of those weird things where I set up the PC in a build video And then I was going to go back and switch it to Linux, but I'm creating content with it, and I can't just like shut down operations. So at one point, I just need to go ahead and do it. But anyway, I found a solution for managing Windows through Home Assistant. There's actually a package you install in Home Assistant, and you also install this service on Windows, and it'll just make the integration work with Wake on LAN,
Oh,
shutdown, all that
okay.
stuff. You don't even have to make your own RPC calls. You just install that on both sides, make sure they can communicate, you're done. And I can Wake on LAN, all of it works just fine. So that'll
Nice.
probably cut that down, the workload on that down by like 75% if you use that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, send me the link so I'll make sure I add it to the show notes and add it to my to-do list.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
No, some of the other integrations where it gets really cool, and we're gonna talk about some of the things we and Jay are doing with it, because sometimes you're like, okay, cool, I can turn the lights on and off. Now what? And me and Jay are going to dive deeper into it. But one of the things I want to mention right away, I put a link to the list of things that me and Jay are using is in the description as well. One of the values you'll find is there's plenty of YouTube channels going over how to do things in Home Assistant. And everyone has their own idea or own thing they want to integrate. One of the biggest and hardest and challenging things, though, right off the rip, is what works with Home Assistant. And that is not made clear by Home Assistant. And let me explain why. When Home Assistant says they work with something, that doesn't necessarily, until you dive into the details of that device, tell you how they work with it. For example, they will say, like, hey, we can integrate with this particular thermostat, but the way they integrate with it is via API key. So now it's not locally controlled at that point. So is saying, and there's a few other like online devices that you have to register with some company's cloud to get it working, but then have an API key to the cloud. I don't really like things that loop out of my network, go to the internet, come back in and talk. So let's talk about a few things I have, and Jay does too, that don't need internet access in order to work. You can disconnect your internet and these devices will continue to function. I wish they had a button on their list of integrations that say integrations that do not require external API keys or internet access to work. And we're going
Right.
to start with the fact that I put in it's a link to this one specifically because weirdly, it doesn't always show up in Amazon searches, but I put a link to the Amazon so you can find it directly. This is the Nortec Quick Stick Combo Z-Wave and Zigbee controller. Now, the reason I went with Z-Wave and Zigbee, those are the two common protocols. And I know Matter is a new one coming out, but as cool as it is coming out and Home Assistant has support for it, the devices aren't out yet. So we'll stick with one that there's plenty of devices for, which is your Zigbee and Z-Wave. Zigbee and Z-Wave are wireless protocols that are their own thing. They are not normal wireless. They're not like your standard Wi-Fi, don't require any access points. And kind of interestingly, the way Zigbee and Z-Wave both work. A lot of devices can act as a relay. So let's say I put a Zigbee or Z-Wave light switch in. First, we start with that little Nortec stick I have in my USB port of my Raspberry Pi. It then links up with the light switch. Well, the other switches that you add after, or light bulbs or whatever, they actually all act as relays. They kind of create their own mesh network. And what they're doing is relaying commands to be simple about how it works. I send it the command, and it can actually, if one of them is too far away, because it's several extensions removed, so to speak, it's a couple hops over. The way that works is it goes, hey, I can talk to this one, and this will also relay the command. So some of the devices don't just act as a receiver, they'll actually just relay the commands to other joined devices. This actually gives you a really solid network, so you don't have to put a bunch of repeaters for Zigbee or Z-Wave. The devices themselves can act as repeaters. This is really convenient. I really thought this worked well. The next couple ones, and these are ones we're using for higher wattage devices. They're called Zooz, Z-O-O-Z, Z-Wave. Like I said, all these are linked down below to make them easy to find. We even use these at my office. We make sure everyone's, way my office is a little bit drafty because it's an older building, and a couple employees want to be able to warm their offices. I also don't want to worry about them forgetting or leaving on like a small space heater. We actually have Home Assistant automated. It warms up their office just before they get there. So it actually kicks on, which turns their space heaters on automatically prior to them coming in, and then automatically turns them all off. So I never have to ask the question, did everyone turn their space heater off? It just automatically goes through and turns them all off. This is a really nice plug that's all based on Z-Wave. The next one is the In Brighton switches. I've had good luck with those, and those are linked down below. Those are like regular replacement light switches. They've worked great to build some of the next automations we'll talk about later, but I can turn lights on and off inside my house. But they're regular light switches. So for some reason, if I am goofing with my Raspberry Pi, no one's left in the dark. So that's they do work as normal switches as well. And I'll mention too that Zeus one, there's a button on it. So for some reason, the Home Assistant has been taken apart because Tom did a stupid thing. You can press a button on it and override it. The next one is going to be the Honeywell Ultra Pro. Honeywell makes some Z-Wave things, which is kind of cool. Honeywell, the company, good brand name. They're a little bit more expensive, but nonetheless, they support Z-Wave. Now, one of the things you have to look, and I specifically linked to the Z-Wave model, and I'll do the same thing for the Hughes lights that I use. I bought the Hughes lights, and before someone starts hammering that they're overpriced, I will 100% agree with you. I found them on clearance for 1/4 of their retail price at Lowe's. So my hardware stores had them on clearance, so I bought some of them, but occasionally you can find deals on them. If you get things like the Hue or the Honeywell or some of these other brands, if you look in the corner of them, and this, I can't say this for every one of them, but I can tell you for the ones I bought, I made sure when I was purchasing them, they say Z-Wave on the box. They'll say requires the Honeywell hub or requires the Hughes Light hub. They actually don't, because they support Zigbee. As long as they're supporting one of these open protocols or documented protocols, I'm not going to go as far as say open, because Zigbee, one of them is open, one of them has a license, and I don't want to conflate which one. But either way, that's not something you have to deal with. But what this allows you to do is just attach them to your Home Assistant. So you're never reaching out to the Philips Hue network. If Philips Hue decided to, and this is the fear and reality for a lot of people, I should say, where you buy a device that connects to the cloud, and then that cloud company goes, you know what we don't want to do? Support this device anymore. Good news
Yep.
or bad news for you guys, it's all bricked. So that's been kind of, a big annoyance on there. And what this allows you to do, though, is say, hey, I want to buy these devices. I want to tie them into my network. Now, one more device that I have on the list here, and it's the Kauf. I'm going to guess on pronunciation here. KAUF Power Monitoring Smart Plug with ESP Home. Now, there's a few other ones, and this is something else that's supported. Some of the ESP Home stuff. They connect to your Wi-Fi network, and it builds. You go ahead and describe it. You're better at describing it because you're the one that has these ones.
Yeah, so these are the ones I have. So quick background. I used to use a brand called Tekken. It sounds similar to the popular fighting game series, but it's not. It's Teckin, and I'm not recommending those ones. Don't buy those. I was using a script to basically jailbreak those and install ESP Home, which is a alternate firmware that you can load that's open source, and that was going well. But then they changed the firmware that it comes with to lock out said script, which is an a-hole move in my opinion. So I found the I don't know, cough, or I'm so sorry, I can't pronounce this well,
Yeah.
but they're great. They actually come with ESP Home built in out of the box. So you plug them in and you check your list of Wi-Fi networks, you join the one that it creates, and then give it the information for the Wi-Fi network that you use for IoT, and then it'll reboot and then connect to that Wi-Fi network. If you fat finger the password or something and it can't connect, it'll reset itself and then create the access point again and give you another chance to enter the password. So it's super easy to install. And once you do add it to the network, Home Assistant sees it immediately. It says, "Hey,
Yeah.
I found a new device in your network. Do you want to add it?" And it's the smart plug. So what I do is add them one by one, because you'll have like a bunch of the same name. It gets very confusing. So I add one, rename it, add one, rename it, and it's so easy that I can't imagine any way to make it easier than that. You just add it to your Wi-Fi network, and they just show up in Home Assistant. It's like magic.
Yep. And like I said, that's another way to do it. You can certainly do those. And it just comes down to if you have Wi-Fi coverage, and that may be something that's no problem for you. So you can put the plugs anywhere, provided they have Wi-Fi coverage. For me, I went with the Z-Wave and the Zigbee ones because the range is good and because they relay. And someone, as they pointed out, has to be a device that they actually specify whether or not the device can relay. It also has to have continuous power, obviously, to be able to do
Right.
that. But different approaches to it. It kind of depends on your use case and which way you want to go. But by the way, they can all live simultaneously. If I wanted to buy a few of these, you're not limited to one or the other. You can use all of them at the same
Yep.
time, which is actually really kind of a neat feature as well, to be able to use all of them. And a few people commented about the things like the TP links. Yes, TP links. There is uh, a little bit of a fundamental problem with the TP link. And this is where I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Watch the age of the video that you're watching it on, because there were certain firmwares. There was some debate, and this is one of the reasons I didn't order some of the TP link. Like, there was some firmware changes you had to make, but you didn't have to make them unless they were a certain age. Like, the older ones had an easy firmware that would support it, and then TP link, because they want you to buy their stuff, apparently had a firmware change that made it harder to make them integrate to Home Assistant. Those are weird little details. That's why I mentioned stuff that works right off the rip versus companies that kind of want you to use their cloud. So they'll do firmware things, like they want to make it, maybe it's by accident, but I really don't feel this way. They may want to make it harder to do the integrations, because they want you to use because a lot of these companies, they sell their own stuff. They're not just selling the plug. The plug is the cheapest part. They usually want to sell you on their services, their cloud, and get you tied into an ecosystem. And this is one thing Home Assistant really helps you defy, is that ecosystem and lock in those companies want to like burden you with, going, you have to use our stuff. And yeah, I see someone said firmware update equals the Tasmota firmware. And this is where that challenge comes in of, yes, you can flash them, but some were easy to flash. And I watched someone in at least a couple forum posts, like, if you buy them and they're after this firmware version, they made it harder to flash them to the other firmware. Also, how much time do you want to spend flashing firmware? That's a you question, not a me question. Because my answer was, I don't feel like flashing firmware. I want stuff to work. Matter of fact, one more thing I'll mention, they're called Gideolid. I don't know how you pronounce that, but there's a link in there. 4-pin RGB color changing stuff. So this is all my under desk lighting. As a matter of fact, my kitchen lighting's done, and I did it all with Z-Wave. These little boxes worked fine, and I bought them because I knew I didn't have to do firmware changing on it. No surgery, just basically plug them in, press button, they get detected and joined. Now, I will admit this, do take a look at the number of Zigbee or Z-Wave devices that you can have in a network. There are limitations. I forget what that number is. It's something like 64 devices. But if you do have more than 64 plugs, you may have to look at other solutions for that. I don't know exactly what that number is, but if you look it up, it's easy enough to find. Don't exceed the number of a lot of devices. So probably a little pre-planning is a good idea.
Yeah, and also know how many amps you're planning on running through that smart plug before you get it, because there's a limit. You have to look at that, because it'll actually be rated for a certain number of amps, and you will overload that if you go above that. But it's actually a very it's not an easy limit to hit most of the time. But don't add your dryer to it, or your vacuum, or any of those weird things, because you're going to have problems. Just take a look at that. But yeah, definitely, those are good ways to go.
Yeah, and the Zeus one I mentioned, and I said Zeus and then Space Heater because it's actually a higher amperage one. The same with the In Brighton switch. That's actually controlling the outside lights in my house, and there's a lot of those. So that switch also has a relay, click type relay in there that was made to handle the higher amperage of running. I mean, my lights are LED, so they're actually not that many amps, but they're the what do they go to? I forget how many lumens they are, but there are a lot of lumens because they're outdoor lights. There is a wattage associated with that, so you do have to think about a lot of those things.
Yep.
Quick side note I'll make in the hard to pronounce part of this. I learned, and I actually think Linus Tech Tips, they did a short video on this of why there's so many weird names for these companies on Amazon. This is how they avoid trademark. They just put it, they're not names that have been lost in translation, like they mean something and maybe because like a lot of these brands might be from China. It's not like they have some meaning in their native language. They just make up and mash words together. That way there's never any copyright or trademark infringement. So they just invent a name that they, Hauf power monitoring system. And there's probably not a company called this because it's not a real word. And now they don't have a name collision when they set up an Amazon store to sell these. So that's a little trivia I learned about why there's so many weird names on there. It's how they avoid it. Also, by the way, if you know how they spell this weird name, because you click on a link, you implicitly find it because there's nothing else with those combination of letters. It's not a word.
That's literally why the band Churches replaced the U in their name with a V, because you otherwise wouldn't be able to Google their name. So they made that one change to make sure you could. People do things like that all the time for SEO. It's actually kind of funny.
Yeah. So it's just kind of fun little tidbits on there. It's kind of weird because I seen someone asking. I don't know which companies have declared like singing the praises of home assistant friendly, but there are companies that are more friendly than others. The nice thing is the companies that do things like Z-Wave don't care, or Zigbee, because they know you got to connect to a Z-Wave or Zigbee, and us technical people will build our own hub as opposed to using some cloud enabled one. So those companies to me are like the least likely to care. By the way, Z-Wave and Zigbee, you're not talking about a standard TCP/IP style protocol. So there's never an opportunity for these little Z-Wave plugs to call home to some external thing. There's no internet access on your Z-Wave controller. That's not what Z-Wave does. It's not how it works.
Right.
So I've seen someone say, well, isn't there some risk about the Wi-Fi ones eventually trying to be on a network and call home? I guess because technically you're giving them, that's up to you then, and it's relying on you to design your firewall rules
Right.
properly for those. That is on you, because you're giving them internet access or you're not, based on your firewall rules, not based on device policy at that point. So just a few things to consider on there.
Yeah, firmware rules. Those are important. That's how I fixed my smart TV that has built-in ads you cannot disable. There's no way to disable the ads at all, and firmware updates constantly that probably just give you more ads. And it just keeps reaching out, and eventually, and you can't even turn that off either. Its ability to reach out to the internet unless you just disconnect it from the Wi-Fi. And I wanted it on Home Assistant, so I literally just added a firewall rule. I think you were the one that gave me the idea to block all outbound traffic from that TV.
Yep.
Absolutely works just fine. I get no more ads. I can't download anything. Every now and then it might complain about internet access, but yeah, that's tough. You don't get internet access, you're naughty.
Yep. All right. On to the automation side of it.
Yep.
And I'll admit, are you using Node-RED at all right now, Jay?
No.
All right. I Me and Jay have built our automations using the native built-in Home Assistance automation tooling. And it's
Yep.
good. It's got a lot of features, but I will admit, and I do not have any documentation or videos on this, but I believe the hookup does. If you type in, it's one of the great. It's one of the top videos. Last I searched, if you type in Home Assistant Node-RED tutorial, he's got a great tutorial that walks you through what Node-RED is. I found the Home Assistant automations adequate, but if you do not find them adequate, Node-RED is an automation that you can integrate completely in there. It's just a package plugin that you can go through the web interface and turn on, but it offers extensible, like chain of events type of things that can happen, timing on those events, conditions, triggering multiple events, and it's all kind of visually drawn. It's really clever how it works. So if you have a more extensive need, it's beyond the scope of this particular podcast. But yes, I'll admit it's a new rabbit hole you can go down where, Jay could build an automation where we monitor his Linode instance and it comes down and blinks different lights based on presence detection of what room Jay is in, or maybe he has to fire off a speaker. Jay, the Homelab show, the Homelab.show has gone down due to this error and reads the last error log. And you could probably write that entire automation there, which is awesome. But yeah, it's pretty neat. But it comes down to what your use case is. I try to go for myself the minimum amount of complexity, and when I get to where I need, cool. And as much as a rabbit hole as this was, I feel happy with the automation I have. But that doesn't mean there's not a future where I'm unhappy and going, I would like more automation in my life, and Node-RED could be the facilitator for that extended. So all depends on how deep you want to go with it.
And I think that's a perfect segue right into this because what I'm finding out more and more is that if there isn't a way to do something, there actually is. You just have to adjust your thinking a little bit. Because we were talking about some things like you mentioned an IR blaster because I was talking about my monitor when I switch from one computer to the next. There's a couple of things I have to switch. There is a remote to my monitor, so I could integrate that. I didn't think about that until that happened. So sometimes you just have to think about it in a different way, and you might find a solution that'll help you, basically automate something that you didn't think would be able to be automated. And another example is the camera that everyone sees me on right now.
Yep.
And that's something that you and I discussed because there's no remote for this camera. So an IR blaster will not work. And that's sad because what I want to do is be able to just say, hey, personal assistant, time to record and everything come on. But the camera has always been the thing that doesn't. The TV will come on, recording PC comes on, lights come on, all of that works. but the camera has a physical on-off switch. You have to toggle. There's just no way around it. So then that's when you mentioned a fake battery, on a cable,
Yep.
and I just leave the camera on all the time and then plug it into a smart plug and I'll automate that. And because it's a fake battery hooked up to a, power cord, essentially, it's just feeding power off of AC. No problem. I just hit the button. It cuts the power to the camera. I hope that's not a bad idea if the camera needs some kind of a shutdown thing. I'll have to look into that. So
Yeah.
a little bit more research is needed, but at the same time, this is the mindset that you go through as you start to think about these things. When something seems impossible, you're like, oh, right. Like in your case, you're thinking about RPC calls, and I'm sure that'll absolutely work. But there's a plugin, just download the thing and it works. And sometimes you just have to know what to search for, because different search terms will decide whether or not you actually find what you're looking for. But there's so many different combinations of settings, and I think that's where it starts to get really fun, when you start to put things together and something cool happens.
Yeah, and this is where, like, especially me and Jay, because we want to, and everything else is the pain in between. Me and Jay really love technology. Me and Jay really love teaching about technology. The pain in between is anything we have to do, from editing to
Right.
the recording to how do we build an automation around that. So one of the things we did was we build automation. Like, Jay comes in and tells his system to record time, and it goes through and sets the lights to a certain setting. It sets the
Yep.
color range of the lights. You can get that specific with it. So instead of him making sure that's all in check, the Home Assistant is now doing all that as an automation.
Yep.
His studio, what it looks like when you see it now versus when I come over and we're not recording, and I've been over Jay's, it's a different look. You have different sets of lights on and things like that. We have these
Mhm.
studio lights around us. And I've done the same thing. You build a scene and you say, this is the thing I wanted to do. I'm lucky that this camera, all I had to do is take the battery out, the one I'm on now. I took the battery out and I leave the power button in the on position. And then I have a switch on the plug that fires up the camera, because it's got an external power source, and it remembers all the settings, because as long as it powers on, all the settings are always at last known setting. So I built automation into that. So it's kind of cool that when, these are one of those things, think about what your goal is. What's the outcome, or what's the pain point you have
Yep.
with these? And then that's how you start your automation journey, is going, all right, I've started with a goal. I know Home Assistant has a million ways to do it. And you keep adding into Home Assistant until you've reached the goal. And neither one of me or Jay needed Node Red to reach that goal, but hey, there may be a future date where we do. But I don't want to discourage you, because if you want to build something complicated, hey, I like to mention that it's there for the extra things you may want to do.
And Shadowy mentioned in the chat room about the Stream Deck, and there is an integration for that. So that's how I have mine set up. So I have an OBS button. When I press it, all the OBS controls come up, like which camera is on me, which scene, if it's a screen capture, or the camera that's on me. I do all that from the Stream Deck. Or I hit the Home Assistant button, and then I have my individual controls there. I can hit the main lights on and off, or do whatever I want to do. And that's just something you install, and it integrates it with Home Assistant, which is pretty cool. It just makes a call out to your Home Assistant box. And that's also really fun, just to have a little Stream Deck. So I have the dashboard that Tom was referring to, that's out of frame in the camera, that's just dangling from the wall. I just go up there, it's a touch screen, I just do whatever I want. But if I'm too lazy to get up, even though it's like 3 feet away, I just hit the Stream Deck and then it does the same thing. So there's all kinds of cool stuff you could do.
Yeah, and one of the integrations where I went further is, I love the fact that they have built in, and this can be done completely locally, is have webhooks. And webhooks, to describe them simply, are a special token or key that you touch. So you make a command. You may use curl if you're doing it from the command line. You can just drop this webhook in a browser, and it doesn't really do anything. It just says, hey, make a request and touch this key. Now that key can be treated more or less like a password, but then you say, when this is touched, this is the trigger event to do other things. I mention it because I have a Synology, and then I have my Synology. I create the webhook on my Home Assistant on the Raspberry Pi, and my Synology is running my camera system, and Synology can do triggers based on the event that's going on. So if you detect a person or a vehicle in my driveway, but not the squirrels and raccoons that are wandering around, but if you detect a person specifically or a vehicle, And then you kick off that webhook, and that webhook then brings it to Home Assistant, which then asks a couple questions of itself, like some conditions. Is it after dark? Because there's probably not a reason to turn on my lights after dark. The next question is, were the lights already on? We don't need to turn them on if they're already on. So that would be two conditions it meets. And if neither one of those conditions are met, it says turn on the lights around my house. So if there's a person detected, my lights all come on, and it may surprise the person, or it may not, or it may be me pulling into my driveway, because it's actually kind of a nice thing. As soon as I start pulling my car, I got a bigger driveway. As soon as I pull in my car in a driveway, it goes, I see a car, and all my lights come on. So I never come home to a dark house. Just kind of fun automations that you can do.
Oh yeah, it's just so much fun. I just have I think actually when I do take a vacation, it's actually going to be like a, oh my gosh, I got time to work on Home Assistant vacation. I'm just going to probably automate everything that I haven't automated yet. And it's just convenience. Like you were saying, some people might think, why? I can hit a light switch. It's no problem. Well,
Yeah.
sure you can. But you're not thinking about it right. Like some of the things that I do, for example, is I have monitors on the sump for, to make sure it's actually, has power and it's on. I get alerts. If that thing goes down, I know. You have to know about your sump. I mean, if you have one,
Yep.
you don't want a basement flood, so you need to know about that. And I have a Nagios alert on my sump pump, and I have Home Assistant watching it too. And Home Assistant also has a check that if someone just accidentally bumps it and presses the button on the smart plug, turns it off, then every 5 minutes Home Assistant is checking, are you on, are you on, are you on? And if it finds that it's not, it'll turn it on. Another trick that I like to do is, I don't know if how many people know this, but you can set up a conditional in Home Assistant. So let's say you have a television, so you add the media player thing for it, so it shows you like what channel it's on and what you're watching, and you control the volume and everything. That's pretty cool. But when your TV is off, that's a waste of space on your Home Assistant. Why do you have that there? But what you can do is add a conditional. If the TV is on, then show the media player widget for it. And then when the TV shuts off, it takes that off the dashboard. So your dashboard isn't wasting any space. You just have a button to turn the TV on, and then it changes to a media, and then it just kind of changes state based on that, which is a lot of fun. So that way you can make clever use of conditionals to have different things showing on the dashboards whenever the status changes.
Yeah, it's really handy, and being able to create multiple dashboards and multiple users, by the way, this is something my wife's not a particularly, she's not tech savvy, she's not into tech, but she, as a general user, she has her own dashboard that's separate from mine. She doesn't need all the studio controls, and it
Right.
might be annoying if she had them, if she accidentally hit ones on recording, that could create really inconvenient. So I have all the different things that we've built for home automation, and to top that off, Synology's integration is really nice because it will pull the cameras and give you the last image that each camera recorded. So if they're, without having to go to the Synology dashboard at all, she just needs Home Assistant, and she can see the temperature of the house, furnace temperature, what it's all set at for our HVAC. She can see the light settings. She can see the Synology, if there's a package got left on the porch, it'll alert her for that. And it all does it right through Home Assistant. So she doesn't even have to go to any other service. So now, instead of going to different apps to do different things, Home Assistant becomes an integrator for those things. This is a nice thing about where I do like the fact that it has the ability to reach out to other cloud services, because maybe whatever that thing is you're doing just doesn't have a local integration option, but you have it, you want to be able to access it and bring it all to one dashboard. So
Yep. Yeah, there's
yeah.
there's so many things. I feel like I could just fill an hour with all the things that I've automated, because sometimes the challenge is, what does the audience want to hear based on me rambling? But if you think about it, you can do it. I mean, I even have a speed test for the internet connection in Home Assistant that
Yeah.
checks every now and then. It tells me what my upload and download is. I mean, the list goes on. There's an infinite amount of things you can do.
Yep, for sure. What we don't have is an infinite amount of time to do this
Right.
podcast, but we
True.
love hearing from you. We're going to be doing a Q&A episode soon, so feedback at thehomelab.show. I will be doing some dedicated videos probably at Home Assistant soon, so I can actually walk through what I did, because I do a lot of Synology videos, so I'll walk through what I do with Synology integration. That'll be a dedicated tutorial. Also, check out all the new things me and Jay are doing. We're both, well, Jay's ahead of me on this. I'm going to catch up, revamping our YouTube channels to better bring tutorials to you. So
Yep.
keep an eye on that. So coming up to the future, you look for some announcements on there. Thank you all for joining, and check out the Home Assistant and let us know what you're doing with it. Send us some
Yep.
feedback.
Some
It's
clever
exciting,
stuff.
and we might get some ideas from it. So hopefully we gave you some ideas. We're willing to hear some ideas from you, and thanks.